There comes a moment in every young life when the path ahead splits into uncertainty and possibility. The scholarship process is not merely a financial pursuit, it is a psychological journey, a test of identity, discipline, and inner alignment. It is not just about gaining support for education, it is about discovering who you are becoming. Parents and students alike must understand this. The scholarship is not the destination. It is a mirror. It reflects effort, intention, resilience, and the unseen forces within the psyche that either propel or restrain us. Let us walk through 5 keynotes, 5 truths that define this journey. 1. The call to individuation. The beginning of the scholarship journey does not lie in forms, deadlines, or grades. It begins in a quiet, often uncomfortable question that arises within the psyche. Who am I truly? When all expectations are stripped away, this question is not easy, because from childhood most students are shaped by external voices, parents, teachers, society, each offering definitions of success, worth, and identity. Over time, these voices form a kind of psychological mask, a persona designed to fit into the world. It performs well, earns approval, and follows the expected path. But beneath this mask there exists something deeper, something more authentic, something waiting to be realized. The scholarship process, in its essence, becomes a confrontation between the persona and the true self. Many students approach it by trying to present what they believe selectors want to see: perfect grades, flawless achievements, ideal narratives. But what is often overlooked is that true distinction does not emerge from perfection. It emerges from authenticity. The world is not lacking in perfect applicants. It is lacking in individuals who understand themselves. To move toward individuation is to begin dismantling the illusion that you must become someone else to succeed. It is the realization that your experiences, your struggles, your unique perspective, these are not weaknesses to hide, but truths to refine and express. The student who has faced hardship, who has questioned their path, who has struggled and reflected deeply, often carries a narrative far more powerful than one who has simply followed a straight line of achievement. This process requires courage because authenticity is risky. It demands that you stop comparing your journey to others. Comparison is the enemy of individuation because it pulls you away from your own path and traps you in imitation. When a student constantly looks outward, at competitors, at expectations, they lose sight of their inner voice. And without that voice, the application becomes hollow, a collection of achievements without soul. Parents, too, stand at a critical point in this process. There is a natural desire to guide, to shape, to ensure success, but individuation cannot be imposed. It must be discovered. When a parent insists on a particular path, they may unknowingly strengthen the persona while suppressing the true self. The role of a parent is not to create a perfect candidate, but to support the emergence of a whole human being. Encouragement should not sound like pressure. It should feel like permission to explore, to question, to become. As the student moves deeper into this journey, they begin to recognize patterns within themselves, the strengths, their fears, their passions, their contradictions. This self-awareness is not merely useful for writing essays or preparing interviews. It is transformative. It allows the student to speak with clarity, not because they have memorized the right answers, but because they understand their own story. And here lies the paradox. The more a student focuses on becoming authentically themselves, the more compelling they become to the outside world. Not because they are trying to impress, but because truth carries a certain psychological weight. It resonates. It stands out in a sea of imitation. Individuation is not a final state. It is a continuous process. The scholarship is simply one stage where this inner work becomes visible. Whether the outcome is acceptance or rejection, the deeper achievement is the alignment between who you are and how you present yourself to the world. In this sense, the scholarship process is not just an academic pursuit, it is a rite of passage. It marks the transition from unconscious imitation to conscious identity, from living according to expectation to living with intention, and those who truly embrace this process do not just apply for opportunities, they transform through them. 2. Confronting the shadow of fear. Fear does not arrive loudly, it does not announce itself as an enemy. Instead, it speaks in subtle, convincing whispers that seem almost like truth. You are not enough, you will fail. Others are better prepared. Why risk humiliation? These thoughts feel personal, as if they originate from your own reasoning, but in reality, they emerge from a deeper, hidden part of the psyche, the shadow. The shadow is not merely darkness, it is everything within us that we refuse to acknowledge. It contains our insecurities, our suppressed doubts, our past failures, and the silent comparisons we make with others. In the scholarship journey, this shadow becomes particularly active because the process itself forces exposure. You are being evaluated, measured, and compared, and in that environment, the shadow finds fertile ground to grow. Many students attempt to escape this discomfort. They procrastinate on applications, avoid writing essays, or convince themselves that the opportunity is not worth pursuing. On the surface, these behaviors appear as laziness or disinterest, but beneath them lies fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of inadequacy, the fear of being seen and judged. Avoidance, however, strengthens the shadow. What is not confronted does not disappear. It deepens its hold. Each time a student withdraws from the challenge, the inner voice grows louder, more convincing, more dominant. Over time, it begins to define identity. I am not capable. I am not worthy. And this belief, once internalized, becomes far more limiting than any external rejection ever could be. To confront the shadow is not to eliminate fear. It is to face it directly, without illusion. It requires an honest acknowledgement. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I am uncertain. But instead of retreating, the student chooses to move forward with that awareness. This is courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. There is a transformative moment when a student begins to observe their fear rather than obey it. When they notice the hesitation before starting an application, the anxiety before submitting a form, the doubt while writing a personal statement, and instead of stopping, they continue. In that moment, the relationship with fear begins to change. It is no longer a master, it becomes a signal. Fear often points toward what matters most. The opportunities that provoke the greatest anxiety are often the ones that carry the greatest potential for growth. The shadow guards the threshold of transformation. It stands at the entrance, not to block the path, but to test readiness. Parents play a crucial role in this confrontation. Too often, fear is unintentionally reinforced through pressure or comparison. When a child hears, "You must succeed," the fear of failure intensifies. When they hear, "Others are doing better," the shadow gains more power. Instead, what the student needs is a different kind of support, one that normalizes fear rather than condemns it. A space where failure is not seen as a collapse, but as a step within a larger journey. Students must also understand that rejection is not a reflection of their worth. It is an event, not an identity. The shadow thrives when rejection is personalized, when it becomes proof of inadequacy. But in truth, every rejection carries information, not condemnation. It refines direction, sharpens effort, and builds resilience. The act of applying itself becomes an act of defiance against the shadow. Each essay written, each document prepared, each submission completed is a declaration, I will not be controlled by fear. And through this repetition, something remarkable happens. The student begins to change. Confidence does not appear suddenly. It is built through repeated confrontation with discomfort. Over time, the shadow does not disappear, but it becomes integrated. Its voice grows quieter, less authoritative. The student no longer seeks to eliminate fear, but to coexist with it, to understand it, and ultimately, to move beyond its limitations. In this way, the scholarship process becomes more than an external challenge. It becomes an inner battle, one that shapes character far more deeply than any result ever could. 2. Confronting the shadow of fear. Fear does not arrive loudly, It does not announce itself as an enemy. Instead, it speaks in subtle, convincing whispers that seem almost like truth. You are not enough. You will fail. Others are better prepared. Why risk humiliation? These thoughts feel personal, as if they originate from your own reasoning, but in reality, they emerge from a deeper, hidden part of the psyche, the shadow. The shadow is not merely darkness. It is everything within us that we refuse to acknowledge. It contains our insecurities, our suppressed doubts, our past failures, and the silent comparisons we make with others. In the scholarship journey, this shadow becomes particularly active because the process itself forces exposure. You are being evaluated, measured, and compared, and in that environment, the shadow finds fertile ground to grow. Many students attempt to escape this discomfort. They procrastinate on applications, avoid writing essays, or convince themselves that the opportunity is not worth pursuing. On the surface, these behaviors appear as laziness or disinterest, but beneath them lies fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of inadequacy, the fear of being seen and judged. Avoidance, however, strengthens the shadow. What is not confronted does not disappear. It deepens its hold. Each time a student withdraws from the challenge, the inner voice grows louder, more convincing, more dominant. Over time, it begins to define identity. I am not capable. I am not worthy. And this belief, once internalized, becomes far more limiting than any external rejection ever could be. To confront the shadow is not to eliminate fear. It is to face it directly, without illusion. It requires an honest acknowledgement. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I am uncertain. But instead of retreating, the student chooses to move forward with that awareness. This is courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. There is a transformative moment when a student begins to observe their fear rather than obey it. When they notice the hesitation before starting an application, the anxiety before submitting a form, the doubt while writing a personal statement, and instead of stopping, they continue. In that moment, the relationship with fear begins to change. It is no longer a master, it becomes a signal. Fear often points toward what matters most. The opportunities that provoke the greatest anxiety are often the ones that carry the greatest potential for growth. The shadow guards the threshold of transformation. It stands at the entrance, not to block the path, but to test readiness. Parents play a crucial role in this confrontation. Too often, fear is unintentionally reinforced through pressure or comparison. When a child hears, "You must succeed," the fear of failure intensifies. When they hear, "Others are doing better," the shadow gains more power. Instead, what the student needs is a different kind of support, one that normalizes fear rather than condemns it. A space where failure is not seen as a collapse, but as a step within a larger journey. Students must also understand that rejection is not a reflection of their worth. It is an event, not an identity. The shadow thrives when rejection is personalized, when it becomes proof of inadequacy. But in truth, every rejection carries information, not condemnation. It refines direction, sharpens effort, and builds resilience. The act of applying itself becomes an act of defiance against the shadow. Each essay written, each document prepared, each submission completed is a declaration, I will not be controlled by fear. And through this repetition, something remarkable happens. The student begins to change. Confidence does not appear suddenly. It is built through repeated confrontation with discomfort. Over time, the shadow does not disappear, but it becomes integrated. Its voice grows quieter, less authoritative. The student no longer seeks to eliminate fear, but to coexist with it, to understand it, and ultimately, to move beyond its limitations. In this way, the scholarship process becomes more than an external challenge. It becomes an inner battle, one that shapes character far more deeply than any result ever could, because the true victory is not in being accepted or rejected, it is in refusing to let fear decide your path. 3. Discipline as a psychological force. Discipline is often misunderstood as mere routine, a rigid adherence to schedules and obligations. But in its deeper sense, discipline is not an external structure imposed upon the individual. It is an internal force that shapes the psyche itself. It is the quiet, persistent energy that transforms intention into reality, thought into action, and potential into form. At the beginning of the scholarship journey, motivation appears strong, almost intoxicating. There is excitement, a vision of success, a surge of ambition, but motivation is fleeting by nature. It rises quickly and fades just as easily. What remains in its absence is the true measure of a student's psychological foundation. This is where discipline emerges, not as inspiration, but as commitment. Discipline begins in the moments when one does not feel like continuing, when the mind grows tired, when distractions become more appealing, when doubt whispers that the effort may not be worth it. In these moments, the psyche stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward comfort and avoidance, the other toward effort and persistence. Discipline is the force that chooses the latter again and again, even when there is no immediate reward. This repetition is not insignificant. Each act of disciplined effort leaves an imprint on the psyche. It reshapes identity. A student who consistently sits down to study, to refine an essay, to prepare documents, even when it is difficult, begins to see themselves differently, no longer as someone who merely wishes for success, but as someone who actively builds it. Identity is not declared, it is constructed through repeated action. There is also a deeper psychological tension at play. Within every individual exists a conflict between the desire for ease and the desire for growth. The part of the mind that seeks comfort resists discipline because discipline requires sacrifice of time, of energy, of immediate pleasure. But the part of the self that seeks meaning understands that without this sacrifice, there can be no transformation. To engage in discipline, then, is to consciously side with growth over comfort. It is to recognize that the temporary discomfort of effort is far less costly than the long-term regret of inaction. Every hour spent refining an application, every revision made to an essay, every small step taken despite resistance, these are not just tasks, they are acts of psychological alignment. Parents often perceive discipline as something to enforce, but true discipline cannot be imposed from the outside. External pressure may produce temporary compliance, but it rarely leads to internal transformation. Real discipline arises when the student understands why the effort matters, when the process is no longer about pleasing others or avoiding criticism, but about becoming the person they are capable of being. This shift is crucial. When discipline is driven by external validation, it remains fragile. It collapses under stress, fades under pressure, and disappears when no one is watching. But when it is rooted in internal purpose, it becomes resilient. It persists even in solitude, even in uncertainty, even in the absence of immediate results. The scholarship process, with its demands and deadlines, becomes a testing ground for this internal force. It does not reward sporadic bursts of effort, but consistent, sustained engagement. The student who begins early, who organizes their work, who revisits and refines their application, this student is not simply working harder. They are developing a psychological advantage. They are training their mind to endure, to focus, to follow through. There is also an important relationship between discipline and self-respect. Each time a student fulfills a commitment to themselves, even a small one, they reinforce a sense of trust in their own ability. They prove, not to others, but to themselves, that they can rely on their own actions. This trust becomes a foundation upon which confidence is built, not the fragile confidence of hope, but the grounded confidence of experience. Yet discipline is not meant to be harsh or unforgiving. It is not about perfection, nor is it about relentless self-criticism. It is about consistency with awareness. There will be moments of failure, days of exhaustion, periods of doubt. Discipline does not demand that these disappear. It demands that one returns to the path despite them. In this sense, discipline becomes a form of self-mastery. It is the ability to guide one's own behavior in alignment with one's deeper goals, rather than being controlled by fleeting emotions or impulses. It is not restrictive, it is liberating, because the more disciplined the individual becomes, the less they are at the mercy of distraction, procrastination, and fear. As the scholarship journey progresses, the student begins to realize that discipline itself is transformative. It changes not only what they achieve, but who they are. It builds resilience, strengthens focus, and creates a sense of inner order that extends beyond the application process into every area of life. And in the end, while the scholarship may or may not be awarded, the discipline developed along the way becomes a permanent asset. It remains long after the forms are submitted and the results are announced. It becomes part of the individual's character, a quiet, powerful force that continues to shape their future. Because true success is not granted in a single moment of recognition, it is built day by day through the unseen work of a disciplined mind. For meaning over outcome, there is a subtle but powerful illusion that takes hold of the mind during the scholarship journey. The belief that everything depends on the final result. Acceptance becomes the symbol of worth, rejection becomes the symbol of failure, and the entire process is reduced to a single moment of judgment. In this narrow frame, the richness of the experience is lost, and the individual becomes trapped in a binary world of success and defeat. But the psyche does not evolve through outcomes alone. It evolves through meaning. To focus only on the result is to overlook the deeper transformation that is quietly unfolding within. Every hour spent reflecting on one's story, every attempt to articulate purpose, every confrontation with doubt and limitation, these are not secondary to the process, they are the process. The application itself becomes a mirror, revealing not just achievements but values, motivations, and inner conflicts. When a student begins to shift their attention from "will I be accepted?" to "what am I learning about myself?" something profound changes. Anxiety loosens its grip. The fear of failure begins to dissolve, not because the outcome no longer matters, but because it is no longer the sole source of meaning. The journey becomes valuable in itself. This shift requires a reorientation of the mind. It demands that the student step outside the constant comparison with others and turn inward. Comparison thrives in outcome-based thinking. Who got accepted? Who achieved more? Who appears more successful? But meaning cannot be compared. It is deeply personal, shaped by individual experience and inner growth. A student who struggles, who revises their essays repeatedly, who faces rejection and continues forward, this student is engaging in a process far richer than mere competition. They are developing resilience, clarity, and self-awareness. These qualities cannot be measured by acceptance letters, yet they define long-term success far more reliably than any single achievement. Parents, too, must be mindful of this distinction. When the focus remains solely on results, pressure intensifies, and the child begins to equate their value with external validation. But when the emphasis shifts toward growth, effort, and learning, the environment becomes one of support rather than judgment. The question changes from "did you win?" to "what did you discover?" How have you grown? There is also a deeper psychological truth at play. Outcomes are never entirely within one's control. They are influenced by countless external factors: competition, criteria, timing, subjective evaluation. To attach one's identity solely to such uncertain elements is to place the self on unstable ground. Meaning, however, is internal. It is constructed through reflection, through intention, through conscious engagement with the process. Rejection, when viewed through the lens of outcome, feels final and absolute. But when viewed through the lens of meaning, it becomes instructive. It invites reflection. What can be improved? What direction should be adjusted? What strengths have I discovered despite this result? In this way, rejection transforms from a barrier into a guide. Even success, when approached without meaning, can be hollow. An acceptance achieved without self-awareness or genuine effort may bring temporary satisfaction, but it does not contribute to deeper growth. True fulfillment arises when achievement is aligned with understanding, when the external result reflects an internal journey. As the student continues through the scholarship process, they begin to see that every step carries significance beyond the immediate goal. Writing a personal statement is not just about impressing a committee, it is about understanding one's own narrative. Preparing for interviews is not just about answering questions, it is about clarifying one's voice. Facing uncertainty is not just a challenge, it is an opportunity to build inner strength. In time, the realization emerges that the outcome, while important, is only a small part of a much larger process. The real transformation lies in the development of character, in the strengthening of identity, in the deepening of self-knowledge. These are achievements that no rejection can erase and no acceptance can fully define. To embrace meaning over outcome is not to become indifferent to success, but to place it in its proper context. It is to understand that while outcomes may open doors, it is meaning that determines how one walks through them. It is meaning that sustains motivation, guides decisions, and shapes the path forward long after the immediate result has passed. And so, the scholarship journey becomes more than a pursuit of opportunity, it becomes a process of becoming. A movement from external validation to internal clarity, from fear of judgment to understanding of self, because in the end, it is not the outcome that defines you. It is the meaning you create along the way. 5. The integration of effort and opportunity. There comes a point in the journey where effort alone no longer feels sufficient and opportunity alone seems elusive. Many students labor intensely studying, writing, preparing, yet remain uncertain if their work will ever meet the right moment. Others encounter opportunities, but lack the readiness to fully step into them. It is in this delicate intersection that a deeper psychological principle reveals itself. Transformation occurs not through effort or opportunity in isolation, but through their integration. Effort is internal. It is the domain of discipline, persistence, and conscious action. It is what the student controls, the hours of preparation, the refinement of thought, the willingness to improve. Opportunity, however, exists in the external world. It appears in the form of scholarships, interviews, recommendations, deadlines, and openings that are often unpredictable and beyond direct control. The tension between these two forces can create frustration because the psyche naturally seeks certainty, yet this process offers none. But this uncertainty is not a flaw. It is part of the design. It forces the individual to prepare without guarantee, to act without immediate validation, and to trust that their efforts will eventually meet the right moment. This requires a profound shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Will this effort lead to success?" the more powerful question becomes, "Am I becoming someone who is ready when success arrives?" Preparation, in this sense, is not wasted, even when no immediate opportunity presents itself. Each skill developed, each essay refined, each challenge faced is stored within the individual. It builds a kind of psychological readiness, a state where, when opportunity finally appears, the student does not hesitate or collapse under pressure, but steps forward with clarity and confidence. There is a subtle danger, however, in misunderstanding this relationship. Some believe that effort alone guarantees success, that if they work hard enough, the outcome must follow. When reality does not align with this expectation, disillusionment sets in. Others fall into the opposite trap, waiting passively for the right opportunity without cultivating the effort required to seize it. Both positions are incomplete because they separate what must be unified. Integration means recognizing that effort prepares the ground and opportunity provides the moment, but neither fulfills its purpose without the other. A well-prepared student without opportunity remains unseen. An unprepared student faced with opportunity remains unable to act effectively. But when preparation and timing converge, something almost transformative occurs. The individual is not merely reacting. they are responding from a place of readiness. Parents often struggle within this dynamic as well. There is a desire to secure opportunities, to create pathways, to ensure that doors are open. While guidance and support are valuable, they cannot replace the internal work the student must undertake. True confidence does not come from knowing that opportunities will be provided. It comes from knowing that one is capable of meeting them when they arise. For the student, this integration requires patience. It asks for sustained effort, even when results are not immediately visible. It demands trust in a process that unfolds over time. There will be moments where it feels as though nothing is happening, where the work seems disconnected from any tangible reward. Yet beneath the surface, something essential is forming, a readiness that cannot be rushed. There is also an element of awareness involved. Opportunity is not always obvious. It does not always appear as a perfect, clearly defined path. Sometimes it comes disguised as a challenge, a rejection that redirects focus, or a smaller chance that leads to something greater. The prepared mind is more capable of recognizing these subtle openings, of seeing possibility where others see limitation. As effort and opportunity begin to align, the student experiences a shift, not just externally, but internally. Confidence becomes less dependent on outcomes and more rooted in preparation. There is a sense of stability, a quiet assurance that regardless of the result, they have done the work required to stand ready. And when the moment finally arrives, when the application is reviewed, the interview begins. The decision is made. The outcome is no longer a matter of chance alone. It is the visible expression of an invisible process that has been unfolding all along. In this way, the scholarship becomes more than an award. It becomes a point of convergence where inner work meets outer possibility. But even beyond that moment, the integration remains. The discipline, the awareness, the readiness, these continue to shape future opportunities long after this particular one has passed, because the ultimate realization is this: opportunities are not rare, but readiness is. And those who cultivate it do not merely wait for the right moment, they become capable of transforming any moment into the right one. Closing reflection: the scholarship process is not a competition against others, it is a confrontation with the self. It asks, will you rise beyond fear? Will you discipline your mind? Will you define your identity? Parents, guide, but do not control. Students, strive, but do not lose your essence. Because in the end, the greatest scholarship you earn is not money for education. It is the awakening of your own potential. Thanks for watching.